So it was chapters 26 was where you started with the last group of chapters. So the first thing I want to talk about is, let's talk about your answer to question number 1. How are Scout's fantasies about meeting Boo Radley different now than they were earlier in the novel? How have her feelings about the Radley house changed? And how do you explain those changes? What evidence can you find in the chapter to explain them? All right, Ty, we're going to start with you. What was your answer for number 1?
I said she doesn't really want to see him as bad as she did when she was younger.
Good.
And she wasn't really scared of the house anymore.
Yep, very good. Good.
And I said that she's gotten older and finds more other things interesting.
Yes, very good. Very good answer. Somebody else share your answer for question 1. Alyssa?
I put that she realized that he was just a normal person. He was just more shy and quiet. And that in the beginning she was more timid of him.
Yes.
And now she just doesn't care for him as much.
Very good. On page 324, that first page of chapter 26, she says, "The Radley place had ceased to terrify me, but it was no less gloomy, no less chilly under its great oaks, and no less uninviting." So she definitely doesn't feel as scared. She definitely, she describes it as still looking the same as it always has. But for reasons of her getting a little bit older, and like Ty said, she's finding interest in other things. What could be another reason why the Radley house does not terrify her anymore? If we think about the whole novel, why would that be something that doesn't scare her anymore? Think about where they've been in the last couple chapters. Aaron, what you think?
We had found a bunch of treats right outside the house.
Yes, very good.
So that might lead to her not feeling so afraid of that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Very good. The things that they had found in the tree could also have to do with her not being as afraid of the place. Very good. What other things has Scout seen that would cause her to be more afraid of other things than Boo Radley? Maybe not afraid, but things weren't as they seemed, I guess, that have happened in previous chapters. JC?
She saw that her town wasn't as what she thought it was, and
Yes.
like it's a nice place, but it was actually like more of a, I don't know.
More judgmental. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. I definitely think that Tom Robinson's trial plays into a little bit of the fact that she's not as scared of the Radley house, because it almost seems like her and Jim having been through that makes something like that house is scary seem kind of immature. So going back to she's getting older. So yeah, very good. Very good answers for number 1. Okay. So also in chapter 26, I want to point out where she says on page 326, she brings up the fact that this is down towards the little past halfway on 326, she's talking about Atticus, and she says, "There was one odd thing, though, that I never understood. In spite of Atticus's shortcomings as a parent, people were content to re-elect him to the state legislature that year, as usual, without opposition. I came to the conclusion that people were just peculiar. I withdrew from them and never thought about them until I was forced to." Okay, so why is it, or how do you explain why the townspeople continue to support Atticus, but yet talk about him behind his back? They're not as gossipy about the trial anymore, because that's kind of in the past. But now they're back to giving him a hard time about the way he raises his kids, which has always been an issue. Like, people have always talked about that, especially Aunt Alexandra. But if they don't see him as being a strong parent, then why do they keep re-electing him to be their representative, do you think? And what does that tell us about the type of people who are in Macomb? Cole, why do you think they keep re-electing him if they don't think that he's a very good parent?
they might want change in the town.
Very good. Maybe people are voting for him because they see that he's the one who's bringing about the most change. Great answer. What might be another reason? Think about the metaphor or the symbolism of him shooting the dog. We talked about the people that were watching. Go ahead, Landon.
No, it's kind of like maybe he's not very good at like parenting his children, but he's really good at what he does and taking care of the town.
Yes, not only that, but he's the only one who will, right? Like with the whole symbolism of him shooting the dog, it was like everybody wanted the problem to go away, but nobody was willing to do anything about it except for Atticus. So I think that kind of comes around full circle in chapter 26. When it's made clear that he's reelected, not only that, but nobody ran against him. So nobody thought that they had a chance at winning against him. So I think that says a lot about Atticus as a character. All right, also in 26, we see that Scout talks about her current events in school with Miss Gates. And so what is it that Scout is confused about Mrs. Gates? The comments that she makes in class, and then later in the chapter, she brings up to Jim something she remembered hearing Miss Gates say. JC?
Well, in class, she was talking about Hitler and how he was like a bad person.
Yes.
And nobody really should like him.
Good.
But then at the trial, she was talking about Tom Robinson the same way.
Yep.
But how could she talk about her own people in Macomb?
There you go.
But then do that to him?
Yes, great answer. So Scout is very confused by the fact that Miss Gates is so against being prejudiced in class, talking about Hitler and the way he's treating the Jews. But then Scout says, if you look on page 329, nope, wrong page, sorry, 331. This is where Scout brings it back up to Jim that she is confused by what Miss Gates says. She says, well, coming out of, this is at the top of 331. Well, coming out of the courthouse that night, Miss Gates was going down the steps in front of us. You must have not seen her. She was talking with Miss Stephanie Crawford. I heard her say it's time somebody taught them a lesson. They were getting way above themselves, and the next thing they think they can do is marry us. Jim, how can you hate Hitler so bad and then turn around and be ugly about folks right at home? So I think JC answered that question perfectly. And then so that leads to the next question. Why does Jim get so upset at Scout for even mentioning what she brings up? What is it that upsets him the most? And then Atticus tries to explain to her, Jillian, what is it? Why is it that he gets so upset? If you read that next paragraph, he says, you'll read what he says that can help you answer it.
Okay, wait, I don't have your same photo.
Oh, I forget. I'm sorry. It's the last page of chapter 26.
What was the question?
The question was, why does Jim get so upset at Scout when she brings up what she brings up about hearing Miss Gates, what she said? Anybody want to help her out? Landon, go ahead.
He says, I never want to hear about the courthouse again, ever, ever, ever. You hear me? So, like, he's, like, getting very, he doesn't like the court case.
Right. He doesn't want to talk about the courthouse because why?
He hasn't
JC?
dealt with it yet.
Say it.
He hasn't dealt with it yet.
Yes. So, go ahead.
He hasn't like processed it and dealt with his problems.
Very good. Yes. And Atticus explains that to her at the end of chapter 26. He says, Jim was trying hard to forget something, but what he was really doing was storing it away for a while until enough time passed. So Jim has still not dealt with the Tom Robinson case and how everything ended the way it did. So for Scout to even bring up the courthouse, it just kind of sets him off. Which we also know that Jim is kind of going through a change in maturity from childhood to adolescence. So that might have something to do with his little anger outburst as well. All right, so let's look at chapter 27. And that was where the second question came from. Scout declares that Maycomb was itself again in chapter 27. In what ways is Maycomb the same as it was before the Tom Robinson trial? In what ways is it different? And then the last question, what do you think must happen in order for a community to become itself again after a traumatic or divisive event? Okay, so lots of questions within that one question, number 27. So let's start with the first part. What does she mean, or in what ways is Maycomb the same as it was before the trial happened? Matthew?
Well, most people stayed the same as the outlook on it.
Right?
And the outlook on the overall, the look on the disease.
Good, yeah. Yep.
And, like, that's probably what
Okay.
I'd say.
Very good. How is it different? Samantha, how did you say Maycomb was different since the Tom Robinson trial?
A lot of people kind of came to the realizations that there's a problem
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to fix it.
Very good. So who specifically, I can't remember if it was this group of chapters or maybe the last group of chapters. Who was it on the jury? This might have been when you were doing your small group discussions. Who was it on the jury that wasn't so quick to say he was guilty? Do y'all remember who that was? Cole?
One of the Cunningham.
It was one of the Cunninghams that was so resistant to saying that he was guilty. And so they eventually had to persuade him to say that he was guilty. So in that sense, Cole, how has Maycomb changed? What has Atticus brought about?
Thinking that there's maybe a change.
Yes. Good. So people who have always been set in their ways of that same racism, prejudice, are starting to see that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can move forward, and with Atticus's help, we can move toward change. Very good. What about, I want to hear what your thoughts are on what must happen in order for a community to become itself again after a traumatic or divisive event where you've got massive groups of people who are clearly divided. And I think that that's kind of a topic that's pertinent to today, don't you think? I think we're very much a country that's very divided right now. So how do communities become itself again? And there is no right or wrong answer, I don't think. I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on the question. Aaron?
They come back together, things are the way they were before whatever event happened.
Yeah. Very good. There has to be a sense of unity found somewhere. Even past working through, issues of being very divided. Somebody else? What were your thoughts on what must happen in order for... Go ahead, Matthew.
We must lose the memories and the people associated with the memories.
Yes, very good. Very good. Great answer. Okay, so let's see, make sure there's nothing else there I want to talk about. And I think there's one more question for... Oh, let's talk about what are the harassment incidents, because I really think that's important in chapter 27. In chapter 27, what harassment incidents does Scout relate for which Bob Ewell is blamed? So let's talk about the instances in chapter 27 where Bob Ewell is harassing someone. I think this is important because it really sets up for what happens at the end of the novel. So who was he harassing? Who was one person he was harassing in chapter 27?
John Taylor.
Yes, John Taylor, who was the judge in the trial. Very good. But do you notice that he doesn't, who was the second one? And then I'll ask that question. So Judge Taylor was one person he was harassing. Who is the second? On page, starts on 333, that big paragraph towards the bottom. Cool?
Was it Helen Robinson?
It was. It's Tom's wife and even his widow, Helen Robinson. So if this woman has not been put through enough, Bob Ewell is following her to work, yelling foul things, or not yelling, but muttering foul things under his breath about her or to her. So what do you notice about the way he goes about harassing people? He doesn't, trying to get you to say it without me saying what I want you to say. What do you notice about the way he harasses people? Is he confrontational about it? He is sort of with Helen Robinson, but with Judge Taylor, they actually don't know if it really was him or not, right? So he was trying to be like sneaky about it. And I think the same thing with Helen Robinson. He was being confrontational in the way he was speaking to her, but he was also he also kept his distance. Because why do you think that is? Why do you think in both instances he kind of kept his distance from both people? Elena?
He wanted people to know that he's watching them from afar.
Yeah, that's a great point. He wanted people to know that he was watching them, but without ever really crossing that line. So that makes me question, do you think he crossed the line when it came to him following Jim and Scout? Did he cross a line? Yes. Okay. Why do we think he crossed the line?
Because they're kids and they did nothing wrong. It wasn't Ben, it was Atticus.
Very good. Okay, they're kids. It was their father who was involved in the court. Very good.
They're
Jason?
kids, so they can't defend themselves
Yeah.
against him.
Very good. They're kids. They can't defend themselves against him. Very good. What else do you think? Any other reasons why? Matthew?
Liquor.
Huh?
Liquor.
Yeah. Scout makes the comment, I could smell stale whiskey. So he'd obviously been drinking, which would inhabit someone's good choices that they make. So, all right. So let's go to chapter 28. At the end of chapter, if you're in this version, the end of chapter 27 says, the very last line is, thus began our longest journey together. And that is when Scout and Jim, it's the chapter before they go to the high school. They're involved in the Halloween pageant. They do all the little games and stuff. And then they head back home. So somebody summarize for us the events that take place as Jim and Scout are walking home. You don't have to give a lot of details. You can just kind of paraphrase for us, summarize what happens as Jim and Scout are walking home. Actually, let me ask this question first. Scout decides at the high school that she wants to leave her costume on, okay? Now, she's got this ham costume on, literally like a ham that you would eat on Christmas or Thanksgiving. So that's what she's dressed as because the person who did the pageant wanted everybody to look like agricultural things or whatever. So she's got this ham costume on, and all she has are two little holes, not that she can directly see out of, but there's it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? You can see through the fabric, mesh kind of almost, but it's not clear sight, okay? So she's got the costume on. It's at night in the dark. So how does the fact that she decides to leave her costume on, how does that affect her understanding of what happens going home?
She can't see anything out of the costume, so she really can't tell.
Right. So she only goes by what she heard. Okay. So when she's describing to Hecate what she thinks happened, all she knows is everything she heard because she didn't really see anything. And what is it that Jim points out about her costume that made her be able to be seen in the dark versus someone else? Do y'all remember what he said? There's something painted on her. Go ahead, Ty. Did you have your hand up? Oh, there's something on her costume that has a shimmery, glitter almost in it.
It was the fat of the meat.
Yeah.
So.
The fat of the ham was painted with shimmery paint. So if you were looking at that, Jim says, I can see you. So he could see at least the outline of her, but she can't see very much when they're on their way home. So what are some things that Scout describes she hears in chapter 28? Starts about page 351 at the very top is where they realize that whoever's following them is running and they're running towards them. And she says, with no child's steps. So if you think about it, if you were listening to the way a child runs versus a grown man, it would sound totally different. First of all, the man would obviously have a heavier footfall than a child would. And the fact that he's been drinking would have an effect on the way that he was running towards them. Okay. So she hears the running toward her. And then what else does she hear?
Jim's arm break.
Yeah. She says there came a dull crunching sound and Jim screamed. And that's when his arm was broken, however it was broken. Why do you think, well, go ahead. Let's identify other things that she says she hears. She hears Jim's arm make a crunching sound and she hears him scream. What else does she hear? Ty?
She heard someone coughing.
Yeah, someone coughing, breathing very heavily, and staggering. Now, once you know what happens at the end, why was that person breathing heavily, staggering, and coughing?
Because they just saw a knife.
That's what the story, we'll get to that, yes. But it indicates that they have been stabbed. The fact that he was breathing, coughing, she said he was coughing fit to die. So it was almost like he was trying to catch his breath. So that is very, very important that she hears that, because even after she hears that noise, what happens? On 352. She still hears somebody breathing. And then she realizes that there were then 4 people under the tree. She looks up and sees, in the distance, she sees there's a man carrying Jim to the house. When she reaches over with her toes, my toes touched trousers, a belt buckle, buttons, something I could not identify, a collar, and a face. A prickly stubble on the face told me it was not Jim's. I smelled a stale whiskey. So she makes her way along in what she thinks was the direction of the road. She finds it, and then she looks down to the street light. So only when the light is hitting that individual carrying Jim, that's when she can actually see something, because there's light being shown on that person. Okay, so then they make it home. All right, let's go to chapter 29. We learn at the end of chapter 28 that it was, in fact, Bob Ewell who was lying under the tree. And Hecate says he has a kitchen knife stuck up under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch. Now, it has taken me a long time and lots of rereading this novel it's like every time I read the ending, I think something different. I think that something different happened. Why do you think that Harper Lee makes the situation between Jim Scout, Boo, and Bob Ewell, why does she make it so cloudy almost? Like it's not for sure this happened, for sure this happened, for sure this happened. Instead, the stories kind of mix together. Does everybody understand that Boo stabbed Bob Ewell? He didn't actually fall on the knife. Okay, so do y'all remember the part where Hecate has a switchblade? And Atticus says, "Where'd you get that switchblade?" And what does he say?
Drunk man.
"I took it off a drunk man." Do you think he's telling the truth? No. Why would it be significant that he took that knife off Bob, or from where Bob was killed?
There's
JC?
evidence of Boo Radley killing him.
There you go. It would be evidence of Boo Radley being there, first of all, and that Boo would have some tie to the crime scene of how Bob was killed. Why does Heck do that for Boo? Why does he remove that knife from the scene for Boo? I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, sorry. Not following my questions in order. Why does Heck do that for Boo? Why does he remove the evidence? Go ahead, Matthew.
So Boo doesn't have to go to court for it.
Mm-hmm. We know that Boo hasn't been locked away as they've thought, right? Boo has done what? He has chosen to stay away from people. And it's like the older Jim and Scout get, the more they get that. They understand why he doesn't want to be around people, especially people in this town, because they're so hateful and they treat people who are different than them in such a bad way that he has chosen to stay inside for as long as he has. So if they were to say, yes, Boo killed Bob Ewell, yes, it was in defense of these children, he would first of all have to go to court, which Heck does not want for Boo. What else would happen? He makes another comment about how people would then see Boo, not in a negative way. If he basically saved those kids' lives, he would be seen as a what? A hero. If that were to happen, Heck brings up the point. He said every woman in this town is going to bring Boo Radley some kind of food for saying thank you for, saving these kids. And is that what Boo would want? Would Boo want all that recognition and all that spotlight? No, not a chance. So in a way, Heck steps up and kind of removes Boo from the situation entirely. So is he justified, do you think, in what he does? I mean, as a sheriff, do you remove evidence from a crime scene? Probably not. That'd probably be frowned upon. But is he justified in his reasons? I think yes. I think this is an interesting question. At what point do you think Boo Radley came out of his house during the whole thing that was going on? At what point? It's a matter of opinion. There is no, this is right, this is wrong. At what point do you think Boo came out of the house? Landon?
Maybe when Jem started screaming at Scout to run.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe he heard Jim say, "Run, Scout, run." Very good. When else might he have come out? Any other ideas?
When he heard footsteps.
Boo. Maybe. I don't see. That's what's always been hard for me to understand is how close that tree is to the Radley house. Like, could he have been close enough to where he heard footsteps? We don't know that. Scout also screamed at Cecil, or she thought it was Cecil. So she screamed at him, so it could have been he heard that because it echoed off of the school walls. Matthew?
I think he's just sitting out there.
Okay, that's a good one too. Yeah, he could have just been watching and waiting, not in like a... And when you watch the end of the movie, I hate the way they put Boo in the movie because they make him look like so creepy, and I hate that. Like, he's really not supposed to be... Like, at the end, I think he's more, like, compassionate and caring and protective. I don't see him as being, like, weird or creepy or anything, but the movie definitely puts him in kind of, like, a weird... I mean, he looks weird and he acts weird. So, in what chapter are we on? 29? 28 or 29? So, for chapter 29... According to Heck Tate, why did Bob Ewell go after Scout and Jim instead of Atticus? According to Heck Tate, why did Bob Ewell go after his kids?
Probably because they're an easy target.
Okay, good. Because they are weaker. Very good. And yes, he did spit in Atticus's face that one time, but I don't think Bob would have ever had the guts to try to kill Atticus. Like, he knew that was not a battle that he would have won, but he could kill his kids, right? And that's what he tried to do. Remember when Heck is looking at Scout's costume there's a clear like stab mark in her costume. Basically, that costume, with her having it on, it saved her in a way. Alyssa, did you have your hand up? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, so that's a great point that Sadie brought up, that they wouldn't be able to defend themselves. He also says at the bottom of page 360, he says, I don't mean to contradict you, Mr. Finch. He wasn't crazy, mean as hell. Low down skunk with enough liquor in him to make him brave enough to kill children. He'd never have met you face to face. So he went after his kids because he would have never had the guts to try to kill Atticus. And Matthew, I think it was you that brought up the point earlier that he had been drinking, and that kind of, messes with your judgment. And then also Heck points out that he's just a mean person. And that's just the bottom line of it, that he's mean. Mean enough to where he literally beat his daughter, and then made her lie under oath on the stand. All right, so the last two chapters, 30 and 31. Who does Atticus believe is responsible for killing Bob Ewell? Who does Atticus believe is responsible? Jason?
Jim.
Yeah. Which, why he thinks that in the first place always kind of like shocks me. I'm like, okay, he had a broken arm. He's 13 years old. Like, obviously Bob Ewell was not a small man. He's a bigger man. So there's a lot of things that would not point to Jim being the one who did it. But Atticus is dead set on the fact that if Jim did it, they're not going to cover things up, that he needs to face up to his consequences. So I think that Harper Lee does that to show us, again, just characterizing who Atticus is as a parent and as a lawyer, as a man. He's very moral. Even his children are not going to get away with something. If they need to face consequences, he's going to see that through. So let's go to the part where she walks Boo Radley home. The page is 372. What traits of Boo Radley show him to be almost childlike in these last two chapters?
He
Go ahead,
didn't
Jason.
walk alone in the dark.
Yes. He asks Scout, will you take me home? He's scared to walk in the dark, which is like, I saw you smile, and it's funny because like Scout and Jim have been scared to even walk on his property, and like this grown man is scared to walk in the dark home by himself, and he only lives a couple houses down. It's not like he has very far to go. So he asks Scout to walk him home. He's scared of the dark. What else? What does he do to Jim while Jim's laying there? He kind of like pets his hair, like, which is just, I mean, it's kind of a childish type thing to do, but, and then what are some other things that he does that are childlike? He doesn't say, the only thing he says is, will you take me home? But at the beginning of chapter 31, it says, once more he got to his feet, he turned to me and nodded toward the front door. So he doesn't use his words to express what he wants, which is also childlike. She says, you'd like to say goodnight to Jim, wouldn't you, Mr. Arthur? Come right in. So it's funny because the roles switch here in this chapter. Scout becomes the adult, and Boo Radley becomes the child that she is kind of like taking under her wing, which comes full circle to, when else did Boo Radley protect Scout? Not only against Bob Ewell, but in earlier chapters. What did he do?
He put a blanket around.
Yeah, he put a blanket around her. Okay, so they go in and they see Jim, and then she walks him home. So my question is, what lesson comes to Scout's mind as she reminisces on the Radley porch? And what is the significance of this? So what lesson comes to Scout's mind as she reminisces on the Radley porch? Okay, so down towards the bottom of 373, in the middle it says, neighbors bring food with death and flowers with sickness and little things in between. Boo was our neighbor. He gave us 2 soap dolls, a broken watch and chain, a pair of good luck pennies, and our lives. But neighbors give in return. We never put back into the tree what we took out of it. We had given him nothing, and it made me sad. I turned to go home. Street lights winked down the street all the way to town. I had never seen our neighborhood from this angle. There were Miss Maudie's, Miss Stephanie's, there was our house. I could see the porch swing. Miss Rachel's house was beyond us, plainly visible. I could even see Mrs. DeBose's. I looked behind me. To the left of the brown door was a long shuttered window. I walked to it, stood in front of it, and turned around. In daylight, I thought, you could see the post office corner. So what lesson does she think of then? She literally is looking at things through whose point of view right then? Yeah. She puts herself literally in his shoes or in his skin, as Atticus says. And she's looking at the neighborhood from the point of view of Boo, the way that he would have seen things happening throughout that summer. So then she goes through the different seasons of the different years, and she mentions the things that he might have seen happening or that he might have seen going on around the neighborhood. And so she literally puts herself in his shoes and looks at things through Boo's perspective. So the last thing I want to talk about, so once she gets back home, she wants Atticus to read to her. Why is it, or what is significant about the book that Atticus reads to Scout? What is significant about the book?
It
Go ahead, Jason.
reminds her of like Boo Radley a little bit.
Yes. Why or how?
Because when she described the story after he read it to her,
Mhm.
it was kind of like the events that happened with Boo Radley.
Yeah, very good. And then, what is Atticus's final statement? This is the last. I think this is the last thing that Harper Lee kind of leaves you thinking about in the book. What is his final statement about people, and what theme does his statement highlight? So, Scout says, and they chased him and never could catch him because they didn't know what he looked like. And Atticus, when they finally saw him, why, he hadn't done any of those things. Atticus, he was real nice. His hands were under my chin, pulling up the cover, tucking it around me. Most people are, Scout, when you finally see them. He turned out the light and went into Jim's room. He would be there all night, and he would be there when Jim waked up in the morning. So what theme does that tie back into? When he says most people are, Scout, when you finally see them. Meaning most people are nice when you finally see them. What theme could that statement kind of wrap up for the novel, you think? Matthew?
You never really know a person until you've walked around in their skin or seen them for who they really are.
Very good. Yes, perfect. Tying back to, I also think it ties back into the Mockingbird quote, that people, things like mockingbirds who don't do anything but just sing or make music for people to listen to. Boo Radley was someone who was nice when you finally see them for who they are, not judging someone based on the color of their skin or their socioeconomic status or how they choose to live their lives. If you're thinking about Dolphus Raymond and Boo Radley choosing to stay inside. So what are your thoughts on the book? Did you hate it? Did you love it? Did you like it? Did anybody hate it? You can be honest. It won't hurt my feelings. Did anybody hate it? Everybody hated it? Okay, that's good. Would anybody read it again? So I would suggest that you wait a couple of years, let a couple of years pass, and then I would come back to this book and I would read it again. Because every time, like I read it every single year, obviously twice a year. And I find something new every time that I read it. And so I don't think you should read a book one time and be done with it, especially a classic like this one. I think there's always something new to read or to find when you read the book again. So, did anybody love the book? Like you loved it and you're really glad that you read it? No. Okay, well, that's all right too. Okay, so again, tomorrow your test will be on Canvas. It's going to be a combination of multiple choice questions, short answer questions, maybe like a short essay question. Obviously, I haven't made it yet. So, all right, so for the last part of class, we're going to at least start the movie. Now, one thing I like to tell people about the film version is that